Themistocles again holds off the Persian fleet, but this time sustains significant casualties and loses some of his fleet. But because of the collapse of the Greek land defense, there is no longer any reason for Themistocles to defend the strait. He leads the surviving fleet south to regroup and fight another day. Knowing the burning of Athens, the cradle of democracy, is inevitable, the Athenians had visited the oracle at Delphi seeking her guidance.
Why do you sit, you who await doom? Flee to the furthest parts of the earth. Zeus, the all-seeing, gives to you a wooden wall, the only thing to be indestructible, a benefit to you and your children.
As usually happens with oracles, the meaning is cryptic. And there are lots of Athenians who believe that the oracle is telling them to stay behind the walls of the Acropolis. But Themistocles believes that the wooden walls refers to the ships of the navy, and that the city should be evacuated.
2 months after the last stand at Thermopylae, Xerxes fulfills his promise to avenge the burning of the Ionian capital Sardis and the loss at Marathon. It has taken 20 years, 2 major cross-continental invasions, and the loss of tens of thousands of lives, but Xerxes finally burns Athens to the ground. But the great loss of lives is averted. The only fatalities are those who refuse to abandon their temple and their god at the Acropolis.
There are a few people who stayed, not many, and he razes everything to the ground on top of the Acropolis, which are the most sacred temples of the Athenians. Basically, that's the payback for Sardis.
A month after Xerxes destroys Athens, the Greeks exact their own revenge. Themistocles lures the Persian king into the Strait of Salamis, where many of the Athenians have fled, and his rejuvenated navy waits. While scholars debate the exact details, it seems that a Greek double agent has fed false information to the Persians about the Greek position. The Persians sail into the Strait of Salamis and are surprised and broadsided by the Greek fleet. Themistocles destroys much of the Persian navy.
The naval battle at Salamis is probably the most important strategic moment of this Persian and Greek war. Yes, the Persians defeated the Greeks at Thermopylae, and yes, they burned Athens to the ground. But the Greek navy inflicted so much damage to the Persian fleet at Salamis that Xerxes has to withdraw. Eventually, he's got to sail home, and if he doesn't have enough warships to defend his transports, then he's doomed.
Xerxes leaves Greece and never returns. Many historians believe this is the beginning of the end of the Persian Empire, for the Greeks now become emboldened and attack the Persians on their own soil. The Greeks will score major military defeats against the Persians at Plataea, Mycale, and Sestos.
The Greeks chased the Persians back to Asia, and they burned that great pontoon bridge that had been built across the Hellespont. They'll let it burn into the Aegean. But before they burn it, they remove those cables, the ones made of flaxen and papyrus that tethered the ships together, and they keep them as trophies. In fact, the Athenians so prized these cables as trophies that they put them in their newly rebuilt Parthenon.
Because the different Greek city-states like Athens and Sparta could abandon their internal differences, they were able to ultimately join together and battle Persia as a unified country. It is a strategy they first employed at the Thermopylae Pass.
Sometimes we don't appreciate how important Thermopylae was, perhaps not from a military perspective, but from a symbolic and cultural perspective. Greece was becoming what it had never been. It was moving away from being a hodgepodge of small city-states into a nation that had a sense of being one, of being Greek more than Athenian, Greek more than Spartan, and to begin to identify its own values and cultures, not as individual city-states, but as a nation as a whole.
Eventually, Philip of Macedon takes this one step further and unifies the Greek city-states into a single country. With this unified country, Philip's son Alexander destroys the Persian Empire and exports Greek culture throughout the world, introducing the vanquished to Greek politics, law, literature, philosophy, and art.
And the culture he spread became the very basis of Western civilization. All of that would have been impossible, would have been completely impossible had Greece remained nothing more than a set of separate city-states. But it had become one nation, its sense of nationalism. And that sense of nationalism began at one important place. And that place was at the pass of Thermopylae.
It was a last stand for Leonidas and the 300 Spartans. Soldiers who stayed behind and fought to the death, while their Greek brethren escaped to fight another day.
Wars are won by breaking the will of your enemy to fight on. And at Thermopylae, Leonidas and the Spartans began to break the will of the Persians.
It would take another 150 years, but the memory of the 300 Spartans will eventually spur the Greeks to victory over the Persians.
If the Persians had been victorious, democracy would have been stopped in its tracks. And it is, I think, inconceivable that democracy would have arisen anywhere else in either the Near East or the Greek world. And that would have been the end of democracy.
For centuries, military scholars have examined the Spartans' last stand, where few stood against many, and death was the ultimate sacrifice. While many still admire and cherish this Spartan heroism and bravery, what is perhaps more important is what the battle did for Western civilization and the world.